you have to be in the community. You have to be in the culture to understand what we're talking about. A lot of people, we're in the United States now. It's called, and we're considered in this United States to be a melting pot, and it's a mixture. And because of that mixture, a lot of people don't have that real, true connection to their heritage, and I understand that, and that's difficult. But I think it's also important to note that we're more than history. We are a culture and a community that is here every single day, living our lives and trying to live in our lives in a way that honors our ancestors, that not only honors our ancestors, but provides for the 7 generations that are coming after us, that our relationships with Unchi, that our relationships with one another, how we parent, and all of these things were affected by colonization. I mean, let's just be real. I'm not here saying that every child that is taken out of a native home didn't need to be removed from that home. We have problems, our own problems within our own communities. What we're saying is that being separated from your mother or your father is difficult enough. Separating them from the way of life and our culture and our community, that doesn't just a t-shirt for us, it is who we are as a people. It is what completes us as a people, it is what fulfills us as a people. And as Crazy Horse said, we are best when we're allowed to be who we are. Do you think that that is one of the major issues? It's not just be taken away from families, that's tough enough, but to be removed from our culture, our community, and our way of life is so crucial to be able to avoid and to stop that we are allowed to be who we are as a people.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Being taken, away from your family unit is hard enough. Um, but imagine being taken from your relatives and your extended relatives, and even individuals who are within the same tribal boundaries that understand your way of life and how things are as an indigenous person of that tribe. Um, and whenever you take children and you place them with non-indigenous families off reservation boundaries, or in border towns, and that is totally, it's severed, right? And we need to keep our children with our people, to cultivate and keep our identity and our traditions and our teachings strong. Um, there's for example, Pine Ridge Reservation. So one of the things that I noticed is um, that there's so much connectedness, right? There's so many teachings that you get from not just your close family, but extended. And, we have this really tight knit community. And it's really important to keep the children where they belong with their people.
If I could
Absolutely.
chime in, Sean,
Yeah, please.
one thing that the brief that the Dakota law sent to the Supreme Court, one thing that it highlights is that um, what is really special about the Dakota country is that, well, it's born of a bad history, which is that the Lakota people were far more unified before the allotment era, and when reservations, also known as prisoner of war camps, even though that's not how they're taught in schools, when they were divided and established, it also divided Lakota people from each other. And for example, like one of my closest friends is Oglala, but she grew up with her family at Rosebud. But those are two separate tribal nations in the eyes of the U.S. government, and so for better or for worse, but for the sake of the law, if this law is struck, if her nephew, right, were up for adoption, it wouldn't matter that he had family over in Rosebud, because now it would be racist to have him be raised by his auntie or something over there, right? Even though it's just what 10 miles down the road. So one thing that our brief stresses is that Indian country is united by these family linkages, and how white or settler society doesn't have the same relationship with family. It's more nuclear. If there's no mom dad, well, the kid must be neglected. That's not the case in Indian country. That's not the case in a lot of other cultures. And I know, Shaun, you mentioned this in Decora, you touched on it, but you know, it's a different culture, and when you are removed from your culture, it's easy to lay down a very simple, rigid. If there's no mother and there's no father, well, the kid, you know, has nothing. And well, that's not true. And often it's the aunties or the grandmas or the grandpas that do a lot of the raising, not just because maybe the mom or dad is too busy working, but sometimes because you need an older figure around to run the show. So that's one thing that our brief talks about. Another thing it talks about, which is what, you know, all you guys have been talking about too, relates to, is that South Dakota is an exceptionally bad place for Native people, especially when it comes to Indian Child Welfare Act. And you know, when the law was passed in 1978, it took years of hearings and testimony and evidence from all different sources, from Native people themselves, from kids who had been caught up in the welfare systems. And at the time, Native kids in South Dakota are 22 times more likely than any other person, namely white people, to end up in foster care. That was the highest rate of the country, period. North Dakota was a close second. And then, you know, that report that Lakota Law was involved with back in the early, you know, around 2012 or so, found that 90% of Native kids who were removed from their homes in South Dakota up until that time, these are all state records, 90% of the Native kids who've been removed from their homes all ended up in white homes. 90%, which is a clear indication that the state wasn't trying at all to follow the law. And there's clear evidence that they never cared to. And, you know, we can get it. That's a separate conversation. But yeah, that's one thing that, you know, the court doesn't have much respect for, but we need to double down on, is that Native people are not white people. They're not settlers. They have a completely different culture. And I know doesn't mean it's one culture, but there's certainly more, you know, you can't paint all people with one brush, but there's certainly more relations and closeness between Native people than there is, you know, from Native people to non-Native people. And that's what the law, you know, as much as it is a starting point, not a final, you know, great solution to everything. The law at least acknowledges that, is that a Native kid in one home would be better off in a home across the country, but with another Native family, than he or she would be with a white family, even 30 minutes away, because you never know what that family's intentions is going to be. So
Absolutely. And thank you for that. I mean, that's very,